number of people that we've housed in the last 6 months has gone up. The social impact has gone up. The reductions to the taxpayer have increased. And also we've reduced carbon emissions. With COVID, because of the type of care that's being carried out in these properties, average care 43 hours per week, what we're finding is very low levels of infection, fortunately. These are working age adults, as you said, and they tend to be physically healthy, but care workers have done an outstanding job at keeping this awful disease away from our residents.
And you also bought 29 properties during the period, so presumably that's kept you busy as well.
It has. All 29 of those properties are new to the social housing sector and obviously bespoke for the people that are living there. But it's been a good period for us, and we're really looking forward to growth in the future. Because as you know, Ian, the demand for this type of property is growing substantially. It's estimated that there are thousands of people in hospital as we sit here today. Average length of stay in a hospital is over 5 years. And yesterday at our book launch, a place for me, we met 50 residents who'd lived in our properties but had previously been in hospital. Some very moving stories. For example, Hope, who'd been in hospital for 5 years. She had a minor mental health condition when she went in. She then ended up in isolation for 3 weeks. The cost to the taxpayer is enormous. And now she's moved into specially supported housing. She's got a new life. And it's just so important that we remember this isn't just about investor returns. It's not just about saving the taxpayer money. It's about enabling people to enjoy their lives fully.
Now, talking of investor returns, Paul, you've been under attack lately from an activist shareholder called Shadow4, who says you haven't been clear with investors over a property transaction. What can you say about that?
Well, what we did, Ian, was we produced a 37-page report in response to those assertions. It's quite clear that nothing that we did was incorrect in any respect. In fact, we were innovating in doing OpCo-PropCo transactions. What we have said to investors is, if you have any concerns about any of our conduct at any time, speak to us. We speak to our investors every day, and we're a social impact firm. We've been running for 5 years. We provide 4,500 homes for people with the most vulnerable needs in society, and that's what we're focused on, providing a progressive dividend for shareholders, meeting the government's need for more social housing, as you set out at the start.
I mean, Shadow4 have also flagged concerns about the financial health of some of your housing association tenants. Is that something that concerns you?
Well, what we do is we work with all our housing association partners. We also work with charities, community benefit societies. It's important to remember these organisations are providing accommodation, management of that accommodation for the most vulnerable people. The vast majority of the cost associated with this product is around care. As we mentioned, 43 hours per week per person, although, of course, that will be half the cost in hospital. Average rents outside London in Civitas portfolio are going to be under £200 a week, and that's paying for accommodation that is bespoke. And obviously, we support our housing associations to make sure that they're getting their governance and management right. We work in partnership with the regulator of social housing to do that. But we're very confident around the state underpinning of this, which really was underpinned in 2006 by the Charter on Disabled Human Rights. The UK signed up to that along with 92 other countries and said disabled people should have the same rights as you and I to a home, and that's what this is underpinning.
All right, Paul, we have to leave it there. Good to talk to you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian.
Now, a bit of breaking news to bring you. This concerns the Conservative Party's fine, which has been announced during the last few minutes. A spokesperson for the party said the Conservative Party has received notification from the Electoral Commission that, in their judgment, the manner in which a payment was reported represented a technical breach of reporting requirements under the Political Parties, Elections and Referendums Act. We are considering whether to appeal this decision, and we will make a decision within 28 working days. No doubt more on that to come on Adam Bolton's All Out Politics in the next hour or so. Well, still to come here on Ian King Live, we'll be taking a look at how global markets are doing this Thursday morning. Stay with us.
I just had a sense that I really, really wanted to do something, and I saw the opportunity and I grabbed it immediately. It was at my nearby hospital. I was fairly confident it would be very safe. I kind of trusted the doctors, trusted the scientists. And so I went along and they talked us through all the risks. And I was like, some of the risks were theoretically, because they didn't know anything about the jab. They'd only experimented with it on animals. So they didn't know how humans would react for sure. So they laid out all these scenarios about different things that could happen. But for me, that didn't make me frightened. It made me reassured because they were so thorough and told us literally every potential outcome, that it made me very confident, or even more confident that they knew what they were doing, and they were about as confident as they could be that it was safe. So when the opportunity came up, I just grabbed it. I knew I wanted to do it, and I'm really glad I did. We watched a video by the brilliantly named Professor Matthew Snape, who told us that the vaccine might only be ineffective. It might also worsen COVID if you caught it. But they gave us a lot of literature, and I later looked it up, and it turned out the reason they were telling us that is because years earlier, they'd been doing a vaccine experiment on a fox, I think, and it had caught the thing they were trying to inoculate it against, and it had been slightly worse for wear because of it. So it was such a remote risk. It was completely theoretical, and yet still they laid it out in full in front of us. They didn't withhold it. If I turned up and Del Boy and Rodney had been handing out vaccines from the back of a van, then I might have been frightened. But it was so reassuring, so professional, and so thorough that I just thought to myself, I really trust these people to know what they're doing. I actually found out in May after a year of the trial, I actually got the placebo. So I immediately got the Moderna vaccine in its place, and I got the second dose of that in July. And very shortly afterwards, I caught COVID. And thanks to the vaccine, in part, it was a very mild head cold.
I'm Dinah Magnay, and I'm Sky's Russia correspondent, based here in Moscow.
They can't arrest everybody.
Well, the pound fell last night to its lowest level against the US dollar in a year following the imposition of new COVID restrictions. Sterling currently more or less unchanged right now against the US dollar, and it's about 1/5% higher right now against the euro. On the equity markets, despite a solid close on Wall Street last night, there was mixed trading in the Asia-Pacific region overnight. Tokyo and Sydney fell, while Hong Kong and Shanghai both rose. Mumbai was more or less unchanged. Well, European stock indices have traded marginally out to the upside earlier on this morning, but look at that, in the last half hour or so, several of them trading now in negative territory. Only the MIB in Milan, well, that's more or less unchanged there, looking at that as well. Big talking point in France today. The French media company Lagardère, that's the owner of the magazine Paris Match and the book publisher Hachette. Its shares are currently ahead by more than 4% in Paris. That's after Vivendi, which is the owner of the pay TV firm Canal+, announced plans for a full takeover. Well, here in London, the FTSE 100 is also in negative territory, currently off just under 0.25%. That is led by some of the so-called reopening stocks. That includes International Airlines Group, the owner of British Airways, off nearly 3%, as you can see there. Whitbread, the owner of Premier Inns, they're off by more than 1%. And Compass, the world's biggest workplace catering firm, its shares are down by some 2% right now. Similar story outside the FTSE 100, all the reopening stocks under siege there. The restaurant group, for example, it's lower. So too is Cineworld, currently 2.5% down. Our Mitchells and Butlers, the pub operator, it's down by nearly 2% right now. Elsewhere, the bus and coach operator First Group, its shares are off by almost 5.5%. That is following a trading update today, which was pretty cautious. As for the oil price, well, you won't be surprised to know concerns over Omicron are sending that a little lower this morning. A barrel of Brent crude currently will set you back $75.23 a barrel. That is off 0.75%. Well, joining me now is the Chief Investment Officer at Waverton Investment Management, Bill Dinning. Bill, very good to see you this morning. What are investors to make of these latest restrictions here in the UK?
Well, I certainly think that some of those reactions you talked about in terms of the pound being a bit weaker, that's probably on expectations that the Bank of England, which after all just a short time ago was expected to raise interest rates, start raising interest rates as early as last month, is probably going to postpone that into next year. And it does create some uncertainty about exactly how people react to this, because obviously there's these working from home restrictions again in place next week. But on the other hand, the government has got a mixed messaging about whether or not people should carry on going to Christmas parties and the like. So we'll have to see exactly what people do and how they respond to the government guidelines. But on the face of it, yeah, this is another sort of delay in the narrative around recovery, and a delay, therefore, in the narrative around the Bank of England being able to raise interest rates. So, I think at the moment the market reaction has been pretty rational. But let's see how people actually respond to this, because we're getting on for 2 years close to of attempted restrictions like this. The backdrop in terms of the credibility of the government around some of these things is perhaps not what it was. So let's see what actually happens. But if people start working from home again, it will have a knock-on effect across various sectors in the economy that'll be negative.
Yeah, Bill, you mentioned sterling there. Obviously, I mean, the Monetary Policy Committee has needed little excuse in recent months to sit on its hands despite this big increase that we've seen in inflation. Are you saying that a rate hike now, I mean, most people assume that it will come in February next year. Are you saying it's off the cards now?
Well, I certainly think it's unlikely in the meeting this month. I think February the market might well even have to push that back. We're in the middle of winter. We've got a new version of a variant of the virus. If the restrictions, if they continue to impose restrictions through into the new year, and it does have an impact on slowing economic activity, then I think that will potentially push further out when they raise interest rates. And I think it will make the market probably more willing to sort of look through the increases in inflation in recent months and think that perhaps that is, transitory is a word that Fed Chair Jerome Powell backed away from recently, but it may well be that comes back. So, the virus is still has the potential to influence markets more by how governments react to it than the virus itself, because from what we can see, the virus itself isn't any more dangerous than previous variations, but it's the government response to it that the market's going to be keeping a close eye on, and whether or not it does dampen the activity across various sectors of the economy.
Absolutely. I mean, it's been fascinating over the last 48 hours or so to watch what's been going on in the US. I mean, ever since Anthony Fauci kind of downgraded expectations or concerns, if you like, about Omicron, I mean, Wall Street's had a pretty good couple of sessions.
Indeed, it has. And I think in the States, it's going to be more difficult, to impose some of those restrictions that we've got here. For a start, the federal government structure makes it very difficult. So it's a state by state determine how they're going to respond to this. My suspicion in the States is it's going to take a lot more before we start to see any attempt by any state government to do any kind of lockdown. So I think in the States, the narrative is still very much about the recovery. It's very much there about inflation. We've got another consumer price index print tomorrow in the United States that will be very closely watched. And as I said, Powell has backed off the transitory argument. The market is now expecting him to increase the speed with which they reduce their asset buying at the Fed meeting next week. The market expectations continue to be that the Fed will be raising interest rates next year. So, and if anything, the Fed officials or those close to the Fed have been suggesting the market's still being too sanguine about the Fed's determination to tighten policy. So if they carry on if they go in that direction, then the US and UK could.
Bill, I'm so sorry. We've got to cut this short because we've got to go over to the House of Commons now. There's an urgent question being tabled on the investigation into Downing Street Christmas parties. This is the Labour MP Fleur Anderson.
More information about the COVID parties investigation. Thank you.
We now have the Minister to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as the Prime Minister said to the House yesterday, he understands and shares the anger up and down the country, as do I, at seeing Number 10 staff seeming to make light of lockdown measures. I join the Prime Minister in apologising unreservedly, Mr. Speaker, for the offence that it has caused to people who have been through what everyone in this House knows is immeasurable pain and hardship as a result of this appalling pandemic. The Prime Minister has been repeatedly assured, since these allegations emerged, that there was no party and that no COVID rules were broken. However, The government also recognises the public anxiety about this and the public indignation, and I share that. And it appears as though the people, in the sense that where it appears as though the people who have been setting the rules may not have been following the rules. Now, as the Prime Minister confirmed to the House yesterday, he has asked the Cabinet Secretary to investigate the facts. And I would like to update the House now, if I may, on the details of this investigation. Now, Mr. Speaker, the terms of reference for the investigation are being published, and I will lay a copy in the library of the House later today. Now, I can confirm to the House that the Cabinet Secretary's investigation will establish the facts surrounding the following: allegations made of a gathering at number 10 Downing Street on the 27th of November 2020, a gathering at the Department for Education on the 10th of December 2020, and allegations made of a gathering at number 10 Downing Street on the 18th of December 2020. Now, the primary purpose of the Cabinet Secretary's investigation will be to establish swiftly a general understanding of the nature of the gatherings, including attendance, the setting and the purpose, and with reference to adherence to the guidance in place at the time. Now, if required, the investigation will establish whether individual disciplinary action is warranted. Now, Mr. Speaker, the work will be undertaken by officials in the Cabinet Office at the direction of the Cabinet Secretary, with support from the Government Legal Department. Now, those officials will have access to all relevant records and be able to speak to members of staff. Now, as with all internal investigations, if during the course of the work any evidence emerges of behaviour that is potentially a criminal offence, the matter will be referred to the police and the Cabinet Office's work may be paused. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, I must emphasise the matters relating to adherence to the law are properly for the police to investigate, and the Cabinet Office will liaise with the police as appropriate. All ministers, special advisers and civil servants will be expected to cooperate with this investigation. And finally, Mr. Speaker, I can confirm, as I've said, that the findings of the investigation will be provided to the House and made public. Following the long-standing practice of successive administrations, any specific HR action against individuals will remain confidential.
Just say to the Minister, it's meant to be 3 minutes, not over 4 minutes. So just a minute. So what I would say is, I'm going to give some flexibility to the other two benches. Fleur Anderson.
I thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank you for granting this urgent question today, and I thank the Paymaster General's statement and more information about this investigation. Trust is vitally important during a pandemic. Trust in the decisions being made, and most importantly, trust in the people making those decisions and the judgment about them. My constituent Sophie wrote to me yesterday. She said, "My mother died of COVID on Christmas Day last year. She was alone and frightened in an isolation room in a hospital on the 18th of December while the alleged party was happening. She was admitted to hospital for a non-COVID related issue and contracted the disease whilst there. Both of us had followed the rules, and it breaks my heart that I was only able to see her a handful of times last year and I couldn't be with her in her final moments. She is angry. People across the country are angry. I welcome the Prime Minister's announcement that he's asked the Cabinet Secretary to conduct this investigation. I've asked for this urgent question as there are further urgent questions to be asked about the investigation. And I don't think we need to call them into alleged parties. They are the parties. Held in the government department or by government ministers elsewhere, are there more parties that we need to hear about? Is this investigation just to say, we're doing something, we'll push it into the long grass, or is it a serious investigation? The Prime Minister has said yesterday, "I've been repeatedly assured that there was no party and no COVID rules were broken, but I've asked the Cabinet Secretary to establish these facts." Who gave these repeated assurances? If there was no party, why did Allegra Stratton feel the need to resign? Is she taking the fall instead of government ministers? If this investigation finds out that the Prime Minister has misled the House, Mr. Speaker, will he resign? I look forward to the terms of reference for the investigation being published later today. Will it include all the parties, not just those three, but any others that were held? Who went to these parties? Can the Minister confirm that the Cabinet Secretary and the remainder of the legal team, just been referenced, didn't go to any of these parties and so are able to conduct the investigation without personal interest? If they happened, who colluded for over a year in the cover-up of these parties? When is the deadline for this investigation? How will the outcomes be made public? Is there any limit on the sanctions that will be given to the people who are found out to have been in the wrong? I welcome the assurance from the Paymaster General that he will refer the Cabinet Secretary, this will be referred to the police if there is a case to answer. And we, from this side, will be following this very closely. Finally, will the government just be straight with the British people? Thank you.
Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I say, first of all, that my heart goes out to her correspondent or constituent and anyone else who lost loved ones, the many thousands who have lost loved ones as a result of this pandemic. The investigation that she refers to, as I said in my opening remarks, is going to be conducted by the Cabinet Secretary. I know that she and those behind her, as well as everyone in this House, has confidence in the independence and integrity of our civil service. The Cabinet Secretary heads the civil service and he is conducting this investigation. As to how long it will last, that will be a matter for him, and the matter will, if it discloses criminality, be reported to the Metropolitan Police for further investigation. But I also, in a previous ministerial role as a law officer, Solicitor General and Attorney General, superintended the Government Legal Department, and that is another organisation which, of course, has integrity and the confidence of all. And it will also be supporting the investigation. All those who are questioned by the investigation, civil servants, special advisers, ministers, are expected and will be expected to cooperate with it. I hope that answers her questions.
So Desmond Swain.
Would it be helpful if there were a greater understanding of the fact that number 10 is not a house, it is a front door behind which there is a suite of modern offices and meeting rooms across 3 floors, and it is perfectly possible to be in the rafters above number 11, completely isolated from what else is happening in the building?
Well, it is certainly true as a matter of geography that number 10 Downing Street is a very large property with a multitude of offices and with many people working inside it. In that sense, of course, geographically, he's absolutely correct.
Martin Doherty-Hughes, the SNP spokesperson.
On the 16th of December, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister asked everyone on national television to exercise the greatest possible personal responsibility. London then also went to Tier 3 restrictions. That is, no person may participate in a gathering. You must not have a work Christmas lunch or party, whether it's an office or in somebody's flat upstairs. On the 18th of December, Dr. Catherine Henderson of the Royal College of Emergency Medicine stated in BBC, we're at a really dangerous point where we could tip into finding it incredibly difficult to manage. The same day, 514 people died of COVID-19. I'm sure the NHS, those in care homes, were already over the tipping point. On the 18th of December, the Prime Minister stated, if you're forming a Christmas bubble, it is vital that from today you minimise contact with people from outside your household. The evening the statement was given by the Prime Minister in Downing Street, a Christmas party was held in number 10, where officials knocked back glasses of wine during a Christmas quiz and a secret Santa. So I wonder if the Paymaster General would agree with me that if something looks like a duck, walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, and it's at a Christmas party, it's usually a duck.
Minister.
Well, no doubt, Mr. Speaker, if the honourable gentleman has any evidence, he may wish to supply it to the Cabinet Secretary or the police. But the point is, he's rehearsed to the House what regulations were in place at the time, and the reality is that that is accepted. What we need to do is investigate the matter of these gatherings. I've said what the primary purpose is going to be, which is to swiftly establish a general understanding of the nature of any gatherings that took place, including attendance, including the setting, and including the purpose. That's what the investigation's all about.
Theresa Villiers.
There is understandable, real public anger about what seems to have happened at Downing Street, and that is contributing to people's unhappiness and discontent with renewed COVID restrictions. So will the government do everything it possibly can to lift the current restrictions as soon as it's safe to do so and ensure that Christmas is not cancelled?
Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to her for her question. My right honourable friend, and I share the anger. And the reality of the matter is that we are focusing on the pandemic as a government and as a nation. We need to ensure that everything is done to protect the people of this country from the effects of this pandemic. And that, of course, is going to be the principal focus going forward, as it has been throughout. But we will always follow the science, and the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care will have more to say in due course on the situation.
Dame Angela Reid.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. First of all, my sympathies go out to the honourable gentleman for drawing the short straw on coming here this morning to answer the UQ. Could he explain to me what the difference between a party and a gathering is in his understanding of the vocabulary? And I note that he did not actually confirm that the gatherings stroke parties, which now we know have happened in number 10, on November the 13th, on November the 27th, on December the 10th, on December the 14th and December the 18th, will be within scope of this so-called inquiry, which many people on this side of the House are already seeing as a cover-up.
Minister.
Well, the issue of the nature of the gathering goes to the heart of the investigation. And therefore, to answer her first question about what the nature of the gathering was, that will be established by the Cabinet Secretary, assisted by the Government Legal Department, and informing the police if any criminality is uncovered. So those questions will be answered in due course.
Peter Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I should say at the start that I think the Prime Minister is doing a great job running the country. But I congratulate the Honourable Lady on getting this urgent question. I think the Paymaster General missed one of the questions that she put. And may I put that question again? It is quite right for the Prime Minister to come to this House and say he was told by someone and he accepted that and did that in good faith. I want to know who that person was that told him. So perhaps the Minister, an excellent Minister, he doesn't need any protection, will tell us that answer.
Well, I don't have that answer, Mr. Speaker, but what I will say, as I already have said, is that if required, the investigation will establish whether individual disciplinary action is warranted. And that will be one of the principal focuses of the investigation. So, of course, it will be ongoing, and it will clearly be in the public domain as soon as it's ready.
Mr. Comment.
In which case, can we get an assurance that the Cabinet Secretary was not involved in giving the assurances to the Prime Minister? Because if that's not able to be given, then it's quite inappropriate for him to be in charge of the investigation. The question of legal advice, though, also comes to arise because the Prime Minister has asserted that no rules were broken. So will the advice in which that assertion was made be given to the inquiry when it's held? And on the question of investigation with the possibility of it then being passed on to the police, will people interviewed by this inquiry be interviewed under caution? Because the Minister himself, as a former law officer, will know that there is a risk of contamination of evidence being obtained in an internal inquiry unfairly, which would then prejudice prosecutions in the future.
Minister.
Well, he's jumping ahead with his last point. Of course, whether or not there be any police investigation is dependent on whether this investigation by the Cabinet Secretary uncovers any suggestion of criminality which is referred to them. If that then happens, that's entirely a matter for the police and not, of course, for the government. But I know the Cabinet Secretary. He makes a suggestion about that. I have confidence in the integrity of the Cabinet Secretary. I also know the Prime Minister, and I have confidence in the integrity of the Prime Minister. And the Prime Minister, and I've known the Prime Minister for many years, and the Prime Minister is a man of honour and integrity, and he has presented to this House. He's presented to this House his position yesterday. What I would say to the honourable gentleman is that he should wait and see what the investigation uncovers.
Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If it turns out that one of these gatherings involved politicians or ministers, it's clearly of a very different order to if half a dozen members of staff burst open a bottle of Prosecco and had a drink before they departed for Christmas. But that doesn't excuse it. But if that is the case, that it was indeed members of staff, it begs the question what sort of supervision and management structure there is. Who were the supervisor? Who was the senior person concerned? Who should have been able to discipline this matter? Can the Minister assure me that a proper management structure is being looked at again to make sure that this could not happen in the future?
Minister.
Well, the matter that he raises is a matter for the inquiry, of course, to uncover. But I can assure him that the people who work in number 10 Downing Street, including over the pandemic, are hard-working, industrious people who are seeking to serve their country. And they work very hard in order to do that. What he, of course, mentions is a matter of great concern to the people of this country, as it is to me. And we are all wishing to know, of course, the terms of the investigation, and I have announced to this House what the terms of the investigation and the scope of it are, and it will clearly be published and a copy will be laid of the terms in this House.
Nick Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Revelations of the December the 18th gathering in 10 Downing Street has triggered much anguish across the country. So can I press the Minister, how exactly will the government's legal department be supporting this investigation?
Minister.
Well, the fact is that the government legal department can support in a number of ways, and it will be up to the Cabinet Secretary to decide how he wishes to seek their support. One of the things that he could do, for example, is ask for their advice as to the legal position in various matters. So there are a myriad of ways that the government legal department can help and can give advice on these matters. It will be up to Simon Case as Cabinet Secretary, who heads the Home Civil Service, to deal with the matter.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the whole House will wish to pass on congratulations to the Prime Minister and his wife on the birth of their new child today. My honourable friend has been very careful in his words when he's been addressing the House. But would he agree with me that one of the key issues here is those that are making draconian rules not only have to live by the letter of the rules, but by the spirit of the rules as well? Including mask wearing.
Minister.
Well, I thank him for mentioning the news that I think in the last few minutes I understand the Prime Minister and Mrs Johnson have been safely delivered of a baby girl, and I'm sure the whole House will wish to send them best wishes. But the point that he makes is understood, and he's right to say that the public are angered by this matter. We share that anger, and the matter must be investigated. Of course, people should follow the rules, and it is crucially important that they continue to do so. That goes without saying, and that applies to everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Everyone experiences bereavement differently. But for those of us who have lost loved ones during the pandemic, there is a sentiment that increasingly unites us, and that is anger. I am angry that while my mum lay dying in hospital, I could not hold her hand. I'm angry that I had to bury my father-in-law and mother-in-law 2 days apart. And above all, I'm angry that members of this government could be so flippant, so callous, and so arrogant as to host not one, not two, not three, but 7 parties and then lie about it. Can the Minister confirm that the Cabinet Secretaries will also investigate December 14 and also November 13, which he missed out? And will he also confirm that the Cabinet Secretary will have access to all documents, electronic communications, visitors' logs, and CCTV footage related to reported incidents?
Minister. Well, can I start, Mr. Speaker, by saying how very sorry I am to hear of his personal losses, and I offer my profound condolences for his losses. And I know that there are many thousands around the country who have also had personal losses, and my heart goes out to them too. I think he referred to the flippancy of a video recording that is in the public domain. It was totally unacceptable. It was grossly inappropriate and frankly inexcusable. And I can say no more than that. I am not going to try and go behind that. What I do say is that we are going to investigate. The Cabinet Secretary, of course, is non-political. He has the authority, as one would expect of the head of the civil service, to call for whatever material, whether it be documents or otherwise, that he wishes. And he will have the support and assistance of the several thousand lawyers in the government legal department, and of course of others if he needs it.
Philip Oliver.
My constituents in Kettering are very angry indeed at reports of Christmas parties in Downing Street during what was a very large second wave of COVID, and the behaviour was totally inappropriate and possibly criminal. Does my right honourable friend agree that serving the public, whether as a member of Parliament or a civil servant, is a privilege, and that the public should be treated with respect at all times, including behaviour inside Downing Street? So will he answer another question from the Honourable Lady opposite, which I don't think he answered in his response? If the Cabinet Secretary or any members of the investigatory team were at any of these parties, will he ensure that they don't take part in the investigation?
Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for Kettering for his question, and I agree with him, of course, that it is a privilege and an honour for all of us to serve our constituents in this honourable House. And what I can say, my understanding is that the Cabinet Secretary has denied any attendance at any gathering that is the subject of this matter. But the reality of the matter is that he therefore can be said to be completely separate at the head of the civil service and able to conduct a thorough investigation, as one would expect from someone with his seniority. He has, I would reiterate, he has, I'm told, indicated that he was not at any relevant gathering.
Owen Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, over the period of the pandemic, there have been offices unable to have their Christmas gatherings, or children able to have their birthday gatherings, or any other type of annual gatherings that people would often have. And I certainly hope we're not going to find that we're but to find that it's the Drinks Cabinet Office that are investigating these matters. But when sanctions have been talked about against staff, I think we also need to be clear that sanctions, if any wrongdoing is found, need to be taken against any members also, regardless of what office they may hold. And could I ask specifically, will this investigation be looking at whether there have been any breaches of quarantine at any of these gatherings?
Minister.
The Prime Minister said yesterday, Mr. Speaker, to this House that ministers, special advisers and civil servants and anybody else would be subject to disciplinary action if appropriate. So that does apply. I hope that answers his question.
Sir Christopher Chell.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister has said that civil servants, special advisers and ministers and civil servants will be expected to cooperate. What happens if they don't cooperate? Will they be required to incriminate themselves? And does this also apply to other guests present, including members of the press?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Case, Mr. Speaker, the Cabinet Secretary will have to determine how he wishes to deal with that matter, and one would expect him to take a robust course.
Direct Twig.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I mean, like a lot of honourable members here today, my constituents are very angry about what's going on in this party, and you know, the fact that they have made sacrifices throughout the year, and they think that one of the outcomes of this should be the resignation of the Prime Minister. He should have full responsibility for the incompetence that's been going on in his government. But, Mr. Speaker, I think it's important to get to the point here. The rehearsal of the press conference. Surely someone yesterday must have asked the person who asked Allegra Stratton the question, why did you ask her the question about the party? So we'd like to know the answer to that. And secondly, Mr. Speaker, going back to the honourable member's points from Wellingborough, is the Minister, who I'm sure wants to come to this House fully briefed and respect the House for what it is, did he not ask anybody before he came here today at number 10, who briefed the Prime Minister that no party took place? Did he do that?
Well, I share his constituents' anger, and I know that his constituents will be representative of constituents around all of the parties. The fact of the matter is that the gatherings will be investigated for what they were and for the scope thereof, and I think he knows that.
Liz Saville-Roberts.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, Fyddairydd. A number 10 source has told CNN that Downing Street was an island where they had to work, and lockdown wasn't happening in the same way there as it was happening for the rest of the country. This single sentence sums up the culture of entitlement of this government. No man or woman is an island. And of course we'll remember for whom the bell tolls, Mr. Speaker. Does he think it is right that the Prime Minister can get away with throwing staff members under the bus, rather than reining in the culture of entitlement he himself has created?
Well, there we'll leave that urgent question being answered by the Paymaster General Michael Ellis about the question of the inquiry into the Christmas parties which took place in Downing Street. He said he'll publish the terms of reference later on today, but it has to be said he was greeted with considerable scepticism from both sides of the House during that statement.
And the details will be...
Well, welcome to All Out Politics, an hour of news, debate and analysis from the heart of Westminster. Coming up, the video, the variant and the venom. New details of the investigation into 3 government Christmas parties revealed as the Prime Minister faces a backlash.
In every elected position that he's ever held, he's broke the rules. So it's time's up. You can't do it as Prime Minister, especially not when lives are at risk.
Was there a party at Downing Street? Will he be resigning as well?
Questions unanswered. Pressure over celebrations at number 10 last Christmas as Boris Johnson faces rebellion about new COVID restrictions. It will make a difference, the Health Secretary says. Tighter action now avoids danger later as he sympathises with the leaked videos and the scorn for it.
I saw that video
I find it very upsetting to see what was on that video, the laughing, the sniggering and things. And I think most people did across the country.
The variant spread in statistics, a special take on the numbers informing the international Omicron response. Also this morning, a bouncer for Boris. The Prime Minister and his wife Carrie become parents again, the 7th time for the Prime Minister, with the birth of a baby girl. But there's no reason for the Prime Minister to celebrate looking at the cartoons. We'll take a look at all the opinions and talking points in today's newspapers in The View. Good morning. Welcome to All Out Politics. We're coming live today from the heart of Westminster. And in the last half hour, the government has given fresh details about the investigation into allegations of 3 parties held at both Downing Street and the Department of Education last Christmas, when Christmas parties were not allowed. The announcement was made as the Prime Minister faces a backbench rebellion over his decision to activate so-called coronavirus Plan B, with pressure over the Downing Street's behaviour gathering momentum.
The Cabinet Secretary's investigation will establish the facts surrounding the following. Allegations made of a gathering at number 10 Downing Street on the 27th of November 2020, a gathering at the Department for Education on the 10th of December 2020, and allegations made of a gathering at number 10 Downing Street on the 18th of December 2020. Now, the primary purpose of the Cabinet Secretary's investigation will be to establish swiftly a general understanding of the nature of the gatherings, including attendance, the setting and the purpose, and with reference to adherence to the guidance in place at the time. Now, if required, the investigation will establish whether individual disciplinary action is warranted.
Well, this morning, the Health Secretary defended the government's decision to tighten restrictions to help stop the spread of the Omicron variant. But MPs have accused the Prime Minister of fast-tracking the curbs in an attempt to distract from anger over Christmas events at number 10 last year. This morning, Sajid Javid told Sky News that he was upset by the leaked video. But he said he expects the investigation ordered by the Prime Minister to be full and thorough.
I spoke to my colleagues in number 10 and I said, look, we actually agreed that it's best to have some time to respond to the video in the way the Prime Minister has now, by ordering an investigation by the Cabinet Secretary. And so I think the idea was just to give them space to react. But I'm pleased the Prime Minister has asked for an investigation. And I can see also why so many people would have been upset by that video.
Labour's Deputy Leader Angela Rayner described the Prime Minister as an absolute disgrace with a track record of breaking the rules.
We know winter is a difficult time for our NHS, so we do have to act responsibly. And by the way, the vast majority of the public understand this and have been doing it. And that's why they're really angry at the Prime Minister allowing this to happen under his watch within the heart of Downing Street. Is an absolute disgrace. And he's got track record. You know, this is a guy in every elected position that he's ever held. He's broke the rules. So it's time's up. You can't do it as Prime Minister, especially not when lives are at risk.
Well, yesterday, of course, did bring the resignation of the government advisor, Allegra Stratton, who appeared in the video mocking the behaviour in Downing Street. Well, this morning we tried to speak to Ed Oldfield, who was also heard joking on that leaked video.
Was there a party at Downing Street? Will you be resigning as well? Are you planning to resign?
Well, with me now is our political correspondent, Rob Powell. Not very edifying seeing Ed Oldfield there. He's head of media or something, isn't he? Son of a Tory donor. And so, yeah, head of broadcast. Now, where is this going for the government? We've just heard from the Paymaster General how the inquiry is going to work inside Downing Street. What about the police?
So yeah, 3 parties that will be investigated. You've got the 27th of November, which there has been reports that this was some sort of leaving do within Number 10, where the Prime Minister may have made some remarks. That will be looked at. Then there's the 18th of December, which is the infamous cheese and wine gathering that was referred to in that leaked video. And then also the 10th of December, Department for Education party as well, which the department has pretty much coughed to already. And what Michael Ellis said was that if any criminality is uncovered in that investigation, it would then be referred to the police. Now, of course, yesterday the Metropolitan Police said they didn't think they had enough evidence to conduct an investigation, but also that they don't usually retrospectively investigate COVID breaches. So if this throws up more cast iron evidence, that could go to the police, who then may decide that they want to take it further.
And how did MPs greet the announcement that we got from Michael Ellis? In fact, I heard one Labour MP sympathise with him for standing up and having to do the job.
Yeah, I think they are not happy, is probably one way of describing it, in part because of the rule breaches, but also they're hopping mad over the introduction of Plan B regulations yesterday, specifically COVID passports as well. I think where MPs feel that they are is that over the last month, they feel like I think they've had to march in behind the Prime Minister on many contentious topics, Owen Paterson-Sleaze row, and then you had the difficult arguments over HS2 and the social care changes as well. And now at a point where they are having to justify to their constituents why they should be living under restrictions, they see more accusations of rule breaking going on in Number 10.
And what about those restrictions? Because I have to say, talking to a lot of people, they seem very confused what was announced yesterday, what's meant to change when.
So the main change, I think, in there is around work from home. So people will be encouraged to work from home if they can, but to go into work if they can't. I think the confusion arises from the fact that people are saying, well, so I have to stay at home, I can't go into the office, but Christmas parties are fine. I mean, I think these are sort of inevitable contrasts and contradictions that arise when the government is sort of trying to take a middling approach to these restrictions. And what it is trying to do essentially is allow businesses to carry on going by saying you can work from home without impacting hospitality too much. Because if they turned around and said, OK, Christmas parties are out, don't go to the pub, that would mean furlough and business support coming back in as well. So these are the sort of inevitable contradictions that arise. But I think it's not hard to see that faced with instructions saying don't go to the office, but you can go to the pub, people end up being a bit confused. And then I think there is the risk that coming on top of some of the alleged rule breaking going on in government again, people just feel that they may well have lost the government's lost the moral authority to tell them what to do.
And just finally, it's pretty clear that the main opposition to tightening the rules is coming from the Conservative side.
It's coming from Conservatives because Labour say that they are in favour of these Plan B regulations and have even been suggesting this morning that they should go further. I think when this comes to a vote, though, you will see a considerable number of Conservative MPs rebelling. It won't matter, though, of course, because Labour will be voting with the government. So
when's the vote?
I think they're debating it next week, actually. I think it's Tuesday.
Right. Rob Powell, thank you very much indeed. Well, the Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, said that implementing the rules would be necessary and would be a middle course that would manage to protect health while avoiding the most severe restrictions. Well, is that going to work? Joining me now is Tobias Ellwood MP. He's the chair of the Defence Select Committee and a former Conservative minister. Tobias Ellwood, thank you very much indeed for being with us. A lot to talk about. Let's just start with the measures being introduced, announced yesterday by the Prime Minister and the Health Secretary. Do you, as a Conservative MP, support those?
Well, I'm concerned about the decision-making that has taken place along with other Conservative members as well. The government claims to be following the science, but we're not confirming either the transmission rate at this point or the severity of the new variant. We're sort of guessing as to what's happened. We're looking at what happened in South Africa, but we're not comparing apples with pears. We have an incredible vaccination program, which means it does look like we're able to tolerate this new mutation that has come through. Yes, it is spreading faster, but if you've had 2 or even better 3 vaccinations, then you are likely to be able to tolerate this. If that is the case, then let's wait to confirm that before we then put forward what are quite dramatic restrictions at a critical time of the year. That is, I think, what's troubling a lot of Conservative backbenchers and indeed Labour as well. let's wait to see what happens before we bring in these new restrictions. Don't forget, you have to continue to have the will of the British people, the consent to support this. The evidence isn't there yet.
Can you explain the logic, though, of saying to people, don't go to the office, but do go to the pub or to the theatre or football matches or whatever? It does seem rather contradictory.
Again, I think you make my argument for me. Absolutely, the nation wants to get us through this this pandemic, but we have to be consistent in our restrictions. And the idea that you are now obliged to work from home, but you're still allowed to have large office gatherings simply doesn't make sense. And again, you want the buy-in, you want the support of the British people, and there's something a little bit illogical about that at this moment.
So will you vote for these measures when it comes up in the House of Commons next week?
Well, I'm going to discuss this a little bit more. I'd like to see a bigger plan, a longer-term vision. We have to recognize that we're going to, the mindset must change. We're going to have to live with this pandemic possibly for years. We're going to have booster jabs probably every 6 months or so. At the moment, the actual program is to burden the NHS, doctors, surgeries, pharmacies to provide these jabs. I'm a vaccinator myself, and you know how exhausted the NHS are at the moment. We need to have a new capability to provide jabs every 6 months, separate to the existing structures that we actually have in place, and then have faith that this system will actually work, meaning that we don't have to introduce new restrictions every time another mutation takes place.
You're mentioning the importance of the vaccine in fighting this. There is a substantial minority of people who are resisting being vaccinated. Would you support either compulsory vaccinations for the general adult population or vaccine passports so people couldn't go to some places if they hadn't been vaccinated?
Well, I think this takes us into a more interesting debate. Rather than introducing restrictions now which apply to absolutely everybody, this is why the Prime Minister, I think, was right to say there needs to be a wider national debate about this. Should the entire country be affected by the fact that those who are going to be affected by the Omicron mutation will be those who are not vaccinated? Because the difference between us and South Africa is the fact that more people in Britain are vaccinated. We have better testing systems as well, which is why they've been affected more than us. I say we've got to get used to this in the longer term. Only 40% of the world is vaccinated, which means another mutation is likely to be created before we're actually out of the woods. We can't be jumping on the bus, off the bus with restrictions in the way this happens. It's such a disruption to our society. You've got think tanks now saying that up to about £4 billion pounds a month will be affected in our economy if these new restrictions are to be imposed.
Do you understand why Allegra Stratton resigned yesterday if, as is still being claimed, there wasn't any rules broken in Downing Street last Christmas?
I'm really sorry to see Allegra Stratton go. She was a very competent person in Number 10. I think we needed more people such as her there. There is an absence of the leadership that I think that most people would like to see during this enduring crisis. We need to expand the bandwidth. We need to have improved decision-making, swifter communications, an understanding of where the nation is actually going. And over the last month or so, there's been a troubling period in British politics. So I'm very sorry to see her depart in the way that this has happened. And I do hope there'll be a focus on Number 10, regrouping, and I think rebuilding that bond, not just with Parliament, but with the British people as well.
But it is taking the British people for fools, isn't it? Pretending that we need an investigation to find out if rules were broken in Downing Street last year.
I think I called for this, a couple of days ago to say it required, and I suggested Simon Case, the cabinet secretary, should absolutely look into this and provide a statement to offer the clarification I think the nation was looking for. But there is this phrase that they use, not just this government, but previous governments as well: never apologise, never explain, and as if you can somehow endure these issues. And I think, as you say, the British people, certainly during a crisis such as this, want the answers and deserve the answers now. So I'm pleased that we are here where we are today, but we should have been here a week ago.
Thank you very much indeed. Tobias Ellwood, their Conservative MP. Well, it never rains, but it pours. The Electoral Commission has today imposed a fine of almost £18,000 on the Conservative Party for failing to declare properly donations for the refurbishment of Boris Johnson's Downing Street flat. But the Commission's findings reveal something else. With me is our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates. Now, of course, Lord Geit, the watchdog on the Prime Minister behaviour, looked into this and gave Boris Johnson a clean bill of health, finding the Conservative Party, which seemed to call that into question a bit.
So what at first glance might feel like a slightly dry story actually potentially today has profound implications for Boris Johnson and raises more questions, certainly for the Labour Party's point of view, about whether the Prime Minister tells the truth when under pressure. Now, this is all about who paid and how for the Prime Minister's personal refurbishment of the flat above number 11 that he lives in with Carrie Johnson. Now, you might remember earlier this year, there were all the stories about Lulu Little, a designer, and wallpaper, and bills spiralling out of control, and the need of the Prime Minister to go beyond the £30,000 he gets from the taxpayer and find other sources of funding from donors. Now, what's happened this morning is the Electoral Commission have been looking into that money pouring into the Conservative Party to pay for this and said, look, you didn't declare that all properly, and that's unacceptable. It was a breach of electoral law, and we're finding you close to the maximum they can fine, which is £20,000. They fined the Conservative Party £17,000. So far, so relatively standard, although clearly a breach of the law by the Conservative Party. But what's potentially really significant is the Electoral Commission have been able to use their extraordinary powers to get hold of the private WhatsApps between Boris Johnson and a Tory donor called Lord Brownlow.
Who's admitted that he paid for it.
Who is the figure who freely admits that he funded large parts of the refurbishment programme. Now, critically, when Boris Johnson was quizzed about this earlier this year, he told his independent watchdog, Lord Geit, former Private Secretary to the Queen, look, I knew nothing about this until February 2021. We know this because in a report in May, Lord Geit set it out. He said that the Prime Minister told him that he knew nothing about such payments until immediately prior to media reports about all the goings-on in February 2021. So Boris Johnson says, I knew nothing. But the Electoral Commission today have published a timeline of what they found in those WhatsApps. And that discovered that on the 29th of November 2020, so a good 3 months before Boris Johnson claimed to Lord Geit that he'd found out that the Prime Minister, and I'm reading from the report now, on 29th of November, the Prime Minister messaged Lord Brownlow via WhatsApp asking him to authorise further, and at that stage unspecified, refurbishment works on the residence. Lord Brownlow agreed to do so and explained that the proposed trust had not been set up, but he knew where the funding was coming from. So this is a big problem for Boris Johnson, certainly according to the Labour Party and other politicians. Boris Johnson told his sleaze watchdog, I knew nothing in February, but the Electoral Commission are saying that they found WhatsApps showing that he was actively engaging with the Tory donor back in November. We've asked the Downing Street for comment. We have not heard back yet. The Labour Party says that the Prime Minister is taking everybody for fools.
Do you just want to ask you about a message that's just come up on Twitter from Dominic Cummings? He says there was no party on Friday, the 27th of November. Red herring. A staff member left their job, walked to the press office to say bye. Prime Minister bumbled in and started babbling. Everyone embarrassed, dispersed. Focus should be actual party in PM's flat on Friday, the 13th of November, reported at the time, but ignored by the lobby. And of course, the controversial party that the Prime Minister wasn't at was on the 20th of November. So what do you make of that?
Dominic Cummings has been stirring the pot and trying to make life more difficult for Boris Johnson for some months since leaving. He's identifying two different events. The party on the 13th that he says is the real deal is alleged to have taken place, I believe, in Boris Johnson's flat. It was, some say, in order to celebrate the departure of him, Dominic Cummings, those who were trying to get him out of Downing Street, celebrating at that point, according to some. Downing Street denied that there was a party that broke the rules at that point. Later that month, there was the Director of Communications left
That's Lee Kane.
That's Lee Kane,
who was an ally of Cummings.
And there was a suggestion that Boris Johnson came in and gave a few leaving remarks before Lee Kane left the building. One of the problems with all of this, Adam, is that there is no commonly agreed definition of a party. Really, we just have to subject questions to the test set by the rules in place at the time. And with disputed accounts, it's quite hard to know.
Now, we know London went into Tier 3 late in November, I think. No, late in December, sorry. At November, the time that Dominic Cummings is talking about, what were the rules about parties or gatherings?
So at that point, from memory, there were, in London, there was indoor restrictions for the rule of 6 for social gatherings. But of course, you were allowed to meet indoors for work purposes. Mingling wasn't allowed. Socialising wasn't allowed. But it depends on, again, it depends on the practicalities of people in an office. At what point does a group of people in an office who end up having a drink at the end of a long day constitute a party? When does it not? At what point does it tip over into something that is clearly illegal? And without footage, it's very hard to say on those different things. But different groups, different factions inside Downing Street are pushing the case for different parties being more important.
And just to be clear, party on the 13th of November, as I understand it from the Paymaster General, that's not going to be in the remit of the investigation by the Cabinet Secretary.
Boris Johnson was asked repeatedly yesterday, as was Downing Street, as to what the independent investigation by independent up to a point because he's the Cabinet Secretary by Simon Case. He's going to look into, and Boris Johnson absolutely clear, it's just that party in December that we've been talking and focusing about so much, that was the butt of the jokes in that leaked video. Some Cabinet ministers suggesting Simon Case might extend the remit, but given the force of Boris Johnson's insistence that it's only that one party that Simon Case needs to get to the bottom of, it's not clear to me yet that the remit will be extended.
And of course, just finally, the discrepancy you revealed between the Election Commission's account of events and what Lord Geidt was told, I suppose will raise questions yet again about what's the whole point of these internal investigations by Downing Street insiders.
I think that's a case that a lot of opposition politicians will now make. I think eyebrows were raised when Lord Geidt essentially said there's nothing to see here. The Prime Minister behaved honourably back in May when he released his report into the flat. The reason that this matters, the reason that this case stands out from quite a lot of others, is it's about Boris Johnson's own flat being refurbished and those bills being met by Tory donors. And the process of that being opaque. The system in this country involves donors ought to declare who they are, and parties ought to declare money being used so we can see whether undue influence is exercised. And this is about Boris Johnson personally, so it does bring it very close to home.
Should say, though, that subsequently Boris Johnson, we are told, reimbursed all the money for the cost of the flat. That's correct, isn't it?
That is what he said earlier in the year, and also Downing Street say, and the CCHQ say that they are looking at appealing the Electoral Commission judgment today.
And another baby for the Prime Minister today.
Yes.
OK, thank you very much indeed, Sam Coates. This is All Out Politics. Coming up next, a micron in numbers. We're going to take a look at the statistics known so far about the new variant as Plan B is activated.
I just had a sense that I really, really wanted to do something, and I saw the opportunity and I grabbed it immediately. It was at my nearby hospital. I was fairly confident it would be very safe. You know, I kind of trusted the doctors, trusted the scientists. And so I went along and they talked us through all the risks. And I was like, some of the risks were theoretically, because they didn't know anything about the jab. They'd only experimented with it on, animals. So they didn't know how humans would react for sure. So they laid out all these scenarios about different things that could happen. But for me, that didn't make me frightened. It made me reassured because they were so thorough and told us literally every potential outcome, that it made me very confident, or even more confident that they knew what they were doing, and they were about as confident as they could be that it was safe. So when the opportunity came up, I just grabbed it. I knew I wanted to do it, and I'm really glad I did. We watched a video by the brilliantly named Professor Matthew Snape, who told us that the vaccine might only be ineffective. It might also worsen COVID if you caught it. But they gave us a load of literature, and I later looked it up, and it turned out the reason they were telling us that is because years earlier, they'd been doing a vaccine experiment on a fox, I think, and it had caught the thing they were trying to inoculate it against, and it had been slightly worse for wear because of it. So it was such a remote risk. It was completely theoretical, and yet still they laid it out in full in front of us. They didn't withhold it. If I turned up and Del Boy and Rodney had been handing out vaccines from the back of a van, then I might have been frightened. But it was so reassuring, so professional, and so thorough that I just thought to myself, I really trust these people to know what they're doing. I actually found out in May after a year of the trial, I actually got the placebo. So I immediately got the Moderna vaccine in its place. And I got the second dose of that in July. And very shortly afterwards, I caught COVID. And thanks to the vaccine, in part, it was a very mild head cold.
I'm Diana Magny, and I'm Sky's Russia correspondent, based here in Moscow.
They can't arrest everybody.
Well, as the Prime Minister announced the tightening of COVID restrictions and activated Plan B, he admitted there is still much to learn about the Omicron variant. Early data from the hospital in Pretoria at the centre of the outbreak in South Africa suggests the new variant could result perhaps in less severe illness than previous waves. But there's also a warning that higher transmission rates could still overwhelm hospitals. Well, let's speak now to John Byrne-Murdoch. He's the chief data reporter at the Financial Times, has been going over the data both in this country and globally. John Byrne-Murdoch, thank you very much indeed for joining us. First of all, the infection rate of this Omicron variant, can we say that it is highly infectious, worse than anything we've seen before?
It does seem to spread faster than the variants we've seen to date. It's not clear how much of that is due to it sort of inherently getting from one person to the next more easily, or whether a lot of that is because of its ability to escape a portion of our immune protection, which means it's just easier to get into our cells, as it were, than what we had before we had that immunity.
And is there anything we can deduce about the effectiveness of vaccinations against it?
It's a really big question. There have been a few lab studies over the last couple of days which have indicated that there could be a drop-off in protection from becoming infected with the variant. But it's very difficult because that's the things that are being measured in the lab are very different to vaccine efficacy. So we don't strictly know what impact this will have on the ability of vaccines or prior infection to stop us being infected. But the key thing is that even to the extent that we do expect a slight drop in our ability to not get infected, in terms of how our protection from becoming severely ill is likely to hold up, there's no indication at all that that will be impacted here.
Now, we've heard from the experts, Professor Neil Ferguson and Chris Whitty and others, that they think that the level of infection is probably going to peak round about the turn of the year, and that it will be at pretty chronic levels then. Is that what the statistics are telling you at the moment?
It certainly shows that Omicron is likely to account for the majority of new cases in the UK sometime in the next 1 to 3 weeks, I would say. Again, the question of what exactly that means in terms of number of people becoming severely ill with this is the big uncertainty, especially given that although the data from South Africa is very, very useful, their population is younger. So how this will play out in a population with more elderly and vulnerable people, we don't exactly know yet.
I mean, when you test positive for Omicron and positive for COVID, what are the consequences of that in terms of hospitalisation and in the worst case, deaths?
So the key number we've been looking at the moment is the percentage of people in hospitals who test positive for COVID who end up in ICU. And during the Delta wave in South Africa, that was just over 20%. So somewhere between 1 in 5 or 1 in 4 people who came into hospital with COVID ended up in ICU. Whereas so far with Omicron, that's down to 1 in 10. So roughly half as likely to end up severely ill than what people were with the Delta variant before that.
So that's good news.
Yeah, it is good news. And I think there's that picture hasn't really changed over the last week as more data has come in. So I think we can be increasingly confident that the percentage of people who will become severely ill risking death with this variant will be lower than Delta. The key thing to note here, though, is that doesn't mean Omicron itself is inherently any less virulent, less severe. It's what we're seeing essentially is that the sheer number of people who've been either vaccinated or infected in the last 6 months, especially in a place like South Africa, means that their immune system, their immune response is now kicking in. And so even though very, very large numbers of people are becoming infected with this, they've got that protection that stops them getting severely ill.
And just finally, you think that the rate of the surge may be slowing a bit, is that right?
It does look, there's the data from the last few days in Gauteng province in South Africa, which is at the heart of its Omicron wave, do suggest that the rate of increase has slowed slightly just over those last few days. So numbers are still going up. More people are being infected each day than the previous day. But whereas that number was rising extremely quickly, it slowed a little bit. So that is a very tentative early sign that this wave, as intense as it is, may subside at some point in the next few weeks.
Thank you very much indeed. John Byrne Murdoch there with some glimmers of hope, if you like. And at 7 o'clock this evening here on Sky News, we'll have a panel of experts in to answer your questions about the COVID outbreak and particularly the new COVID variant. Please email them to the address you can see now on your screen, news@sky.com, or you can send in your questions by WhatsApp at the number 07583 000 853. You're watching All Out Politics. Coming up next, the Times cartoon makes fun of the Downing Street drama. We'll take a look at that and all the other opinions and talking points in today's newspapers and news websites in the View.